Hello, people. It's finally time. So, we're going to begin a new series here, and we're going to be talking about the death of video games and what killed them. And particularly what killed, I think, video games in the West is an event called Gamergate. Now, some of you might not know what I'm talking about. Some of you little Zoom Zooms might be a little bit too young to have lived through these times. Maybe you're lucky. Blessed be your hearts. May you never know such darkness. You will never have known the light or the greats of humanity. You will never have experienced the good, but you also won't experience the bad. You will be neutral, tabula rasa. But for those of us that have seen the face of war, who have been scarred by it, who have been left without much, let's talk about the fall of video games, shall we? So, to go into quickly, what was what was Gamergate about? Let's go into it, shall we? Gamergate was basically about some slore named Zoquin using her body to get some positive reviews on a video game, which then spiraled out of control as 4 and 8chan decided to personally attack anyone that spoke up against them to try and cleanse the social justice plague, to use right-wing cancel culture against the left in a response to left-wing cancel culture. Now, in a fair world, this would have worked and these people would have left the industry. But we don't live in a fair world. We live in a world where the government uses its force and uses its oppression on one race and one race alone, on one gender and one gender alone, and that's generally white males. And so the whole of society is built up to attack white men and attack their vices and their virtues. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We need to break this down, and this is probably going to be a multi-part ordeal here. So today, I think let's set the stage, because if you're watching this, hopefully you want to get a little bit deeper than the TLDR, than 4chan trying to hold some gaming journalists accountable. Let's talk about what really happened, and let's really start with where this all begins, which is the decline of the West. So I think a good starting point to describe the culture at the time would be the year 2000. In the year 2000, we had an election. We had George Bush versus Al Gore, the inventor of the internet, the creator of it, in fact, as he said at the time. The internet is a series of tubes. Now, I might be memeing, and a lot of you Zoomers might not know what I'm referring to with a lot of these memes, and I understand. I'm an old man. So, I hope you can enjoy the old man prattling for what it's worth. And we can get into that. So in the year 2000, we had another free and fair election, the most free and fair election ever. For instance, people are thrown in jail constantly for trying to question this election in the year 2000. For instance, I am so glad that, the one man, Mr. Al Gore, has 4 indictments with 88 charges against him, I'm so glad that he, too, as an election denier, was executed, just like all the election deniers in our country. Just like all the people that have been charged with RICO cases for organizing legal defense to try and question an election, like what happened in Florida, when George Bush's brother, Jeb Bush, just so happened to have found the ballots to allow Mr. Bush to claim the presidency. It's just how it is, just how it happened. There's nothing you can do about it. You aren't going to do shit, as the term goes there. So stolen elections seems to have bad consequences for the country, and usually they end up causing terrible economic damage, and this one did as well. But there were 2 things that double whammied at that point that I think destroyed the country. One, we have the obvious stolen election when George W. Bush took this here presidency from Al Gore, even though he didn't win because of his brother's influence. Spoiler, I can talk about that stolen election, I guess. That one's perfectly fine, but don't link that to any other potential stolen elections. Certainly not ones where a coalition of shadowed billionaires somehow fortified an election. We're not going to talk about that. Don't draw any modern parallels to today either. This is strictly historical analysis. And then, on that same vein though, a year later in one of the more earth-shattering events happened in America, and that was 9/11. So that's when this duly elected great president, George W. Bush, had to handle one of the greatest and most terrifying controversies ever, and that would be the 9/11 terror attacks, where, two planes somehow managed to take down two gigantic towers that fell directly on their footprints for some reason, like a controlled demolition, and also a building that wasn't hit by any sort of debris or plane also then went and collapsed directly on its footprint. Also, all of these buildings had been insured less than 2 months before by Larry, Fickle Silverstein Shlomo Schuckelberger, for their full value, and he was paid out trillions in insurance for them 2 months before they were Al-Qaeda'd, we'll say. You can, again, I'm not sure about if I can talk about that one, but, we'll say that stolen elections have consequences and stolen buildings have consequences. And that gave justification for, it didn't really give justification, but we did anyways. So that gave justification for a series of wars in which America sought to expand its imperial empire through the east, through the Arab nations, and we done get our oil. And so George Bush, of course, paid back Saddam Hussein for attempting to murder his father by toppling his empire and installing some American puppet government that's surely going to collapse and destabilize the nation. That went over so well. So, that was another great idea. But yeah, so against this backdrop then, we deal with this incompetent nincompoop for 8 years, and the economic damage is palpable to the country at this point. The 2008 crash, it sounds like that when you steal the votes from the people, elect some puppet that's warmongering, basically, the candidate that's BlackRock personified, feeding into the military-industrial complex to destroy the entire world, which is the goal there. That's what happens. And so we get the delicious 2008 crash just as we swap over to the king of division, the rape ape himself, Barack Obama, who then spends the next 8 years ripping the country apart and destroying anything good. Now, while we had a wonderful genesis of media during the 2000 through 2008 period, mostly just because everything was so memeable, culture still could express itself, we hadn't been hit with this social justice backlash yet that was brewing. And we didn't know it, but our institutions were being infiltrated. And the institutions finally strung their trap after they had King Deviser himself, the man that destroyed race relations in this country, maybe forever. After they got Rape Ape in power, then they sprung their trap and started taking over all the media institutions, all of the other institutions of power, and that included the video game institutions. So our media was invaded by social justice cretins, and we didn't realize it. We had a warning shot with Diablo 3 and how garbage that was, and how video games suddenly seemed to spike in the exact opposite way that they had been going. Like, things were decent. 2008 might have been a peak, but, earlier years were not that bad, right? So the golden years pretty much ended the second Obama got into power. He pretty much started to cause absolute chaos and just made everything careen down. And then, as our spaces were getting ravaged, as, Blizzard was falling, as all of these companies started to falling, now it was time for gamers to strike back, at least in our own little social way. So Zoe Quinn cheated on her boyfriend with a bunch of people, slurred around to try and get good reviews for a video game. I'm not going to go over every single event because that would be a multi-hour long just timeline description. So I'm just going to set up the basics so you can kind of understand the cultural mores at play. We're in a decaying society now, and there's a culture war that is still raging to this day, starting to be ignited. And with that, 4chan then goes on the offensive, later migrated to 8chan to avoid the whole, invasion rules, the whole doxing that was about to take place, because there was about to be a little bit of trolling done, specifically against some women that spoke out against video games. The people that, in fact, painted themselves as a target, claimed they were oppressed and then got oppressed. Not even that badly, by the way. All of it just crying for the sake of crying. all of these people got together and then rallied to grift, write a bunch of articles, and then collect sweet BlackRock ESG money, which was the entire point that they put the targets on their backs in the first place. And yeah, I'm sure some people receive death threats on the internet from all of this. I've received death threats on the internet before, not related to anything on this YouTube channel, but other things. Like, if you're a grown adult, you shouldn't be, terrified of a death threat on the internet. But of course, these are women, and they're going to use the state to protect themselves. And so what really does this say, though, as Zoe Quinn slept around and tried to use the state then as a shield, use the police as a shield, and use violence as a shield against her infidelity so she could try and promote a shit game no one will ever play? Was this really worth the destruction of video games? Or were video games being destroyed, and was this trying to fight back against the disruption, which is how I'm going to phrase it. I see Gamergate as an attack on an industry that had gone woke, as an attack on the destruction of video games and the war against white men, which we didn't even know was brewing at that time. Like, this had all been starting in these Marxist academies and institutions and been billowing out and spilling over into society, and we just didn't know about it at that point. People were just reacting and thought, okay, well, these people can't be serious, they're absolutely retarded, this has to be a joke. Little did we not realize that it would take a full decade for it to settle in that none of this was a joke, and that these people are actually just genocidal maniacs that want to destroy white men and all of the things they enjoy. And they always have been. Woke means anti-white male, and that's the only thing it's ever meant. It's racism against white people in general, and against white men specifically. So anyways, one of the institutions that was co-opted a long time ago was the police force. Zoe Quinn used the police force to silence her boyfriend who was telling about her infidelity, and to my knowledge that restraining order is still in effect today. Ergey, whatever his name is, still cannot speak to you people about the events or even tell his side of the story because he is under a gag order because people were saying mean things to a woman on the internet. I'd like you to think about that in the most free and fair place supposedly in the world, with the most free and fair elections. Ignore what happened in 2020. You're not allowed to talk about that. And ignore what's going to happen in 2024 because I don't see anything changing because you're not allowed to talk about that either. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a super secret sneaky plan, but it is what it is. The government will protect the women and minorities, and they will kill the white man. There has been a culture war against you, and it's been existing ever since, and Gamergate just brought it to the front of it. It brought it into our eyes. It's made it perfectly clear that minorities, that non-white men will never be held accountable for their actions, that you're not allowed to hold them accountable, that they will run roughshod over institutions, over everything, and destroy it, and you will sit there and you will enjoy it. You will watch as Velveeta Entertainment gobbles up Blizzard, and then these woke, millennial nihilistic retards who can't write their way out of a paper bag all destroy it. You'll watch them drink like these women's breast milk on the Blizzard HQ offices, and you'll put on your clown makeup and you will laugh, and there is nothing you can do about it. And that's the reality, is we lost the war on Gamergate. To my knowledge, the restraining order on that guy is still in effect. To my knowledge, video games have gotten worse, not better. To my knowledge, now it's assumed that the reviews are bought, that the entire industry is just a joke. Gamergate took the video game accountability industry from something that had offense to, some bad incidents, to now there is no good incidents. There is no good video game journalism. No one even reads it anymore who's a real gamer because it's pointless. Because it's all been co-opted. Because it's Marxist filth. You can't trust a single word of it, just like any sort of media. It's all lies, And when that Russian CIA or KGB agent said, our job will be complete when nothing Americans believe is true, his job is complete. We have lost. But now we're going to have to go into, in the next series, all the individual events, what they mean, how they go about it, and then we're going to try and piece this together into how video games died. So hopefully you enjoyed at least the introductory to this series. Have a nice day.